Also, keep the culverts up there and put the berry shells on there as well. They still got COVID.
And Hannah Wilson is in ICU, but her last report is that she's stable. So that's good. She had a bacterial infection, and it was bad. It was bad.
If also, if anybody's watching live, y'all want to add a comment or prayer, go ahead and do it. So Hannah Wilson, I saw I think her brother in the hall.
Yeah,
Right?
he's here.
Lucas.
He's here. He's gonna come with us.
Also during this time, I'm going to pass out the attendance and Q&A cards for Richard. We'll start on this side. Officer Wilson, I still think there's not that much of an update on him. He's still just
he's not doing well.
So he's not working.
Anyone else? Any updates on anyone else? Seeing it.
Cousin Jack Spark, he's been in the hospital now 4 weeks, on a respirator, ventilator, whatever you call it.
Ooh.
Kidneys, lungs, shutting down, both bone marrows not producing blood, so it's kind of dire.
Jack Sparks.
Jack Spark.
I would say we got the furry shawl. Do we put the furry shawls on there? Yeah, COVID's gone pretty rampant. I was talking to Jessica about it yesterday on Facebook chat. She's gonna play it safe, even though she's got the negative test. She's just playing it safe. Oh, there's one up there. I just found out my friend. Could you read that, Alex? Is she closer?
This is Joanne.
Joanne.
Oh my God, YouTube.
Can you read that comment, Alex?
She's at work, has corona, so we hope she comes back this week, or we're not sure when she comes back.
All right.
So Miss Fingers.
That's from Sarah Dagner.
Okie dokie.
Miss Fingers' friend Joanne.
Man, everyone's talking about COVID and this new Mu variant.
New what?
There's a Mu variant. Mu. I heard a funny joke. I don't know if we have time. Yeah, it's about Pokemon. But I'll tell it later. We gotta talk about Jesus first. Anyone else? Any updates? Any? Yeah.
I don't know how. I don't know he's on death's door. He didn't have to leave.
I know some of the ladies are going on a beach trip this week from church. So pray for them, safe travels. I know my mom's going to be there, so she's got one of those weak immune systems. So part of me was like, well, I don't advise it, but then the other part of me was like, well, I do like to have a week to myself. So, hey Richard, could you get that door?
I think
Skip just went out there.
Skip, can we get?
All right. If there's nothing else, let me see. Alex, could you lead us in an opening prayer?
Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for all the many blessings you bestow upon us each and every day. Thank you for another opportunity we have to come here and just learn a portion of your word. We want to lift up in prayer all the people that were mentioned this morning, everybody that was on the list. Just please strengthen them, encourage them, take care of them in any way they need. We thank you most of all for your son who died on the cross section for us, and it's in his name we pray. Amen.
Amen. So we're getting to like a very intense moment within Acts, especially with Paul coming up. We're in Acts chapter 23. And so can someone get 1 through 10? Or go through 11 actually. Let's just get 1 through 11 real fast.
Then Paul, looking earnestly at the council, said, Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God till this day. And the high priest Ananias commanded those who stood by him to strike him on the mouth. Then Paul said to him, God will strike you, you whitewashed wall, for you sit to judge me according to the law. And do you command me to be struck contrary to the law? And those who stood by, do you revile God's high priest? Then Paul said, I did not know, brethren, that he was the high priest, for it is written, You shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people. But when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, Men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. Concerning the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am being judged. And when he had said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. For Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, and no angel or spirit, but the Pharisees confess both. Then there arose a loud outcry, and the scribes of the Pharisees' party arose and protested, saying, We find no evil in this man, but if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him, let us not fight against God. And when there arose a great dissension, the commander, fearing lest Paul might be pulled to pieces by them, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him by force from among them and bring him into the barracks. But the following night the Lord stood by him and said, Be of good cheer, Paul, for as you have testified to me in Jerusalem, so you must also bear witness at Rome.
So there's a lot to take in, is there not? So the first thing I kind of find interesting is when we're looking at this, and I'm using right here The Truth for the Day by Eddie Coiler, if I can ever say his last name right. There's something very different with Paul versus two instances. When we look at Jesus and when we look at Acts 4, what's the big difference right here? It's kind of the big thing that's going on. So I'll kind of give it up.
So what are you talking about, Jesus
And what happened in Acts 4 the first time with the council, with Peter in
Are
there?
you talking about? But what about Jesus? Are you talking?
When he was taken up. I'll read it. Maybe better explain it. But let me see. The Roman commander had brought Paul before the Sanhedrin to find out what crime had been committed. During the formal trial, one of the first orders of business was reading the charges against the accused. That procedure had been waived when Jesus was on trial. When we look at Matthew 26, 59 through verses 62, and when the apostles were tried back in Acts 4, 5 through 7.
I see.
Because the council had no charges to bring in those instances. So think about that. There's actually kind of a charge here, is there not? So when we look at it, they hope that the words of the accused would provide them with the formal charge. You're talking about Jesus and the apostles prior. So here there's already kind of one. We've already seen the mob, we've already seen the uproar. That's, in a sense, kind of the trial. But the next thing I want to look at is, who is the high priest?
And,
Yes, but who is he? Do we know?
He does Sadducee, I believe.
So why is this kind of like a important fact to know of Ananias? Think about this.
Because he's leading the charges or whatever in light of not believing in a resurrection or angels. And Paul, however, is preaching both.
So what about personally do we know of Ananias?
He's also the one that oversaw Jesus' council.
So again, looking at the source, it says Ananias the high priest was one of the most ungodly and unscrupulous men ever to hold that position. He stole tithes from his own priests to make himself richer, and had people murdered so he could stay in power. Again, this is with, the Herodians as well, Herod's reign. And so he was notorious. He was notorious as a glutton, a thief, a robber, and a quellish in the Roman service. So he was also one of these Jews, kind of like, in a sense, like Herod was, like a puppet Jew in a sense. He was more independent, but I guess the best way you could say is he knew how to play the game, and he played it very well. So
I think it's interesting how Paul, he doesn't pull any punches, and how he reviles him. You whitewashed walls.
that's the next thing I was going to get to. So where does that come from? Where do we see that again?
That's the next seven, so it's Steve told the council.
So it's actually going up about further. So Paul referenced the white.
Jesus talks about a whitewashed tomb. That they clean the outer part, but inside is full of dead men's bones.
Yep.
It's just a facade. He's just telling me it's a fake.
Yeah. So Paul reference to the whitewashed wall was familiar to his audience. The prophet Ezekiel had compared false prophets to the crumbling walls that had been whitewashed to cover their flaws. So here we're seeing that being.
And whitewash is historically it's like a lime, wash with. It looks like paint, but it's not, and it's gonna. You put it up there, it's gonna wash away, and you're gonna have to keep applying it. So when he refers to that, he's just saying you are. For you to be the high priest, it's thin. You're not the high priest of God.
And another thing that's kind of interesting about that instance is the apostles' prediction that God would strike Ananias for his cruelly came true in less than 10 years when the high priest was assassinated in 66 AD by Jewish zealots because of his pro-Roman sentiment. Now this doesn't mean like it was inspired or anything, because we see like he later apologized for it. But he's also given them a heads up, like
Apologize?
Paul in a sense. And we're gonna get into that too. Do you revile God's high priest? I was not aware, brethren. He's saying that, but there's also two instances as well. There's two ways you can look at how he's questioning it.
I think it's sarcastic.
That's one way, is he being sarcastic. And another is, and something that we should take into account as well, is Paul's very old at this time. He's getting very old, at the end of his life. So some wonder, how could Paul not know that he was speaking to the high priest? That's something to think about too as well. Maybe he was, couldn't see him. Maybe his eyes were going out.
But you think he apparently ran with this crowd in the
Yeah.
earlier days. So whether you saw it by sight or here, he probably knew Ananias.
Well,
I'll say this, as hang out with your grandparents over the years, and you'll notice, my grandfather, Larry Morgan, if he's watching, I'm sorry I'm using him as an example, but he used to hear anything and everything. He had bat's ears. Now he has to have his Bluetooth earphones in to watch the games. He can still see, he still works outside, but like you talk about hearing. So just because he ran in the crowd doesn't mean over time that he didn't know. But I do also think it's kind of a mixture. I think he's getting old, but once he realizes where he's at, it could be that he's being sarcastic.
the only problem with that, to me, is verse 3, when he says, God's going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. Are you sitting to judge according to the law? So he knows who he's talking to. And he makes that accusation. I mean, you don't just throw out an accusation to someone you can't recognize. I mean, it's very, very specific.
That's kind of also going to the whole group as well. It's going to the whole Sanhedrin, is it not? He's not.
This is you.
Right, verse 2 talk about Ananias specifically.
Okay.
There's a possibility, according to Kaufman and Josephus, there was a Jonathan who was the high priest for the government of Judah. So Ananias might not be the active high priest at this time. I think they still call.
Well,
they would still call him the high priest, even though he's not in that office.
well, what's interesting is
Kind
during
of like the president, Mr. President, even though he's not the president right now. So Ananias might not even be the high priest right now, and that might be one of the reasons he's.
It's interesting because during the time of
Yelling.
Jesus, Ananias and Caiaphas were together as well. So it was, You had the Jews high priest, but then you had the
Herodians.
high priest.
You know, we've seen that a lot of times with we had the two popes, the one, I think the French Pope, and then the actual one based in Rome.
Pope,
Yep. So we've seen that multiple times in history. It's not crazy to think, but there's a lot in the background that I think we have to observe. Like, these discussions are really good. They bring that up. So, and another thing, like you were saying, since Paul had been closely associated with the Sanhedrin, perhaps he actually thought he might get a fair shot. So why was he thinking this? Why would he think he'd get a fair shot at the Sanhedrin? Well, who's making up the Sanhedrin?
Pharisees and Sadducees.
And what does he say? I'm a son of a Pharisee. So that's going to lead us into more. So he's bringing this up as he's saying, I'm a son of a Pharisee. He's kind of saying, like, most of you I probably knew. Most of you, we have these maybe familial ties. It's like if I go to, I don't like to say this, I've never done it, but let's say if I go to court and I know the judge's brother, it's like, hey, we hung out. Come on.
It's interesting though. He actually does a point here because he's actually splitting the Sanhedrin.
And that's a good
Nowhere is he
point.
saying, look,
He knew how to manipulate.
Exactly.
Yeah, he's showing the Roman commander,
Mhm.
hey, these people, you shouldn't believe anything they say.
They're also,
That's
They're-
perfect.
They're not reliable,
So what are the three main reasons why they're splitting up? So you have the Sadducees on one half, the Pharisees on the other. What are what I would say, the three main points on what's going to split them up on this?
resurrection, angels. Well, I can't remember the
Holy Spirit.
Spirit.
Nor a spirit. There's no spirit. So the Pharisees believe this. So when we're looking around verse 6 and 7, you see Paul talking about the hope of the resurrection and all this stuff. That's going to lean more on the Pharisee side. It's going to, in a sense, that's what he's kind of doing. He's kind of saying, look, I mean, the resurrection took place, all this stuff. It's kind of, since when you're looking at political party, when you're looking at the modern day Republican or Democrat, you find the one thing that what the center, what they disagree on, and you see both sides do it, and they go, let's just poke it. And you see the internal conflict. That's essentially what he's doing right here. He's saying, look, I'm a Pharisee, I'm a son of a Pharisee, I know the laws, I followed them. I've been constantly following them. I believe in this and that. I want a fair trial. And you have the Sadducees on one hand saying, that's kind of garbage. That's not cool. But then you have the Pharisees on the other hand looking at it, it's like, well, I don't like Paul, but he's right, and I don't really care for the Sadducees. And so that's what he's doing. He's using the enemy of my enemy, my friend. People don't realize they're on the Sanhedrin, but the discussions is a philosophical debate that they don't like to have. They have to forcefully be cordial about it. So I think it's a very telling thing. So
He's also among the mindset of, if you go back to Acts chapter 5 with Gamaliel, he says, look, let's weigh what's going on here. If this is of God and we're against it, then we're in trouble. If it's not, then,
Gamaliel, yeah. And Gamaliel's, who is he held high in regards on which of these two factions?
The Pharisees.
Pharisees.
He was actually Paul's teacher.
And like Ben pointed out, it was last week, the week before, Gamaliel does not take that many students. And for Paul to be a student, to do this, it's just kind of like a, look, I know my stuff. You know where I come from. And the Pharisees, on one hand, they don't want to help Paul, but they don't want to be on that side. So it's kind of a weird thing going on. But another thing too, and I want to kind of go back to the beginning, because I was reading this little section before we started class, and it's literally in the AP Study Bible, I recommend getting it. It's a good one. They look at verse 1 specifically in chapter 23, and it talks about, then Paul, looking earnestly at the council, said, Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day. So think about that last part, until this day. What is he trying to emphasize?
That's kind of a Hebrew way of saying, like, I've always done it.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
you see that he's not living in conscience that day.
Yeah.
He's just saying, to this day, to the day that he's on trial. See, they're on trial. He's on trial, if you think about it, for things he's done in the past. And so he's standing before them on this day saying, I've lived my life in good conscience.
Yep. And this is what the AP Study Bible has brought up. That's good. And we've heard it before. But something that needs to be said about today. Many people, as they point out, look at there being multiple paths. You know, all religions lead to the same road, in a sense. Some people believe whatever journey you take on this life, we're going to still make it to whatever it is. I mean, Disney kind of has a movie about this recently called Soul. You know, it's just the creation of the soul and the afterlife, that process, in a sense. And so, I think what they're trying to get at here, which I think is kind of important to look at before we move forward, is there isn't a multiple pathway. You can't be a Muslim, you can't be a Buddhist, you can't be in these, cheers, you can't be in these, you can't be outside of God. Huh?
They're talking about Gideon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh.
You can't be Gideon right now. But you can't be outside of Christ and expect to make it into heaven. And the example they give is, it's kind of funny because this has been brought up recently, but 2 plus 2, what does it equal? If you're sure that it's 5, and you say it's 5 and it's wrong, well, you got to go back to kindergarten. But also you're wrong. I mean, it's an all or nothing quiz. 2 plus 2 is 5. And it's fine. We take that so seriously. We're like, no, you got it wrong. You fail. But in today's world, it's a weird thing. And it's what they brought up. I just thought it was an interesting fact that we don't have that mindset when it comes to your theology or your beliefs. It's a grab basket, and at the end, we're going to make it to whatever the goal is. We're just taking a different path. So, but going forward, so we're seeing the Pharisees, the Sadducees, they're breaking up, and another thing that I think is kind of cool is the statement of the Pharisees. The statement of the Pharisees did not so much indicate that they were for Paul; they were against the Sadducees, and they were thrilled to have an opportunity to goad them. So think about that. We've talked about there's a separation, but they don't care to be right. They care more so to win against their opponents. And then the last thing I want to look at is basically in verse 10. When you're looking at this, who's the one person trying to find the truth? Who's the one person that's trying to actually do the right thing in a sense?
The commander, it seems like, he actually wants to know what's going on.
That's right. It's funny. The Roman officer, he's like, look, I just want to get to the bottom of this. What did he do? He's a Roman citizen. I got to follow the law, treat him well. Y'all are upheaving. Y'all are fighting, trying to kill this guy. What did he do?
Yeah.
Like,
why do we assume that the Pharisees and scribes that defended Paul are doing it because they hated the Sadducees? Why don't we just say that they defended,
oh, that's a good question.
Some of them got up and argued vehemently, is what this translation says. We find nothing evil in this man. What if a spirit or angel has spoken to him? So this seems straightforward reading is that they didn't see anything wrong with what Paul was doing, and he identified as a Pharisee. So not all the Pharisees were bad.
Yeah, and some did defend him, but and that's a good point. I never thought about it like that.
And Paul's still a Pharisee. He says, I am a Pharisee, not I was. So, I mean, we
tend to think that all Pharisees are bad because Jesus had a lot of bad to say to the Pharisees. But, you know, there was hypocrisy within the Pharisees.
And that's it.
And even the Pharisees themselves, they were self-critical. Like in rabbinic literature, it talks about there's 7 types of Pharisees, and only one of those types is good. And they were talking about themselves.
Yeah.
Like, not that they were good, but, you know, it's like saying, you know, in this room there's like 7 types of people, only one type of person's good. It's the same kind of concept. So they were self-critical, and they realized that, you know, certain things were wrong about them.
And that's
I think about Nicodemus. I mean, he came to Jesus by night, but he said, "We know that your teacher come from God."
Yeah.
So he's giving a great light to the Pharisees
Mm-hmm.
because they recognized that he was the Son of God. But he had to come by night because not everyone did recognize that he was the Son of God, or they were willing to say it.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't honest about it. But the fact that Nicodemus took the body of Christ in broad daylight later on shows that he saw the error of that. And you know, Pharisees obeyed the gospel.
And there's a little excerpt in here. I'm going to read it. It kind of goes to what you were saying. The Pharisees had their own grievances against Paul, but they could find nothing wrong with his statement about the resurrection or even the possibility that he may have received a heavenly vision. So at the end of verse 9, some Greek manuscripts have, let us not fight against God, which is kind of common in the King James Version. And
Is that not also just taking the words of Gamaliel?
Yeah,
Mhm.
sounds like what he said.
It's
Yeah.
identical to him. So he had a lot of influence, and it's obviously carrying on even now as they're standing there.
Yeah. So, yeah, and I think there's probably a portion of the Pharisees, this is my personal thought, part of the Pharisees probably thought Paul was either right or he did nothing wrong, and so they were doing the right thing in their eyes. But you also have to think there's another part of the Pharisees that probably just, humans want to go to the other side. They have to share the branch. So
The Pharisees weren't like a unilateral group. There were differences within the Pharisees themselves. Like, you had the house of Shammai and house of Hillel, and like they were all Pharisees, but they disagreed with each other. You know.
I think we brought them up in Mark when we were talking about divorce. They had a big.
Shammai was more conservative, and Hillel was more liberal approach. And so it created really two parties within.
And that's a good, and this is a good conversation because I do think, like I was kind of mentioning, we do cup them into one basket. We say, Pharisees have to be like this. Ben points out, probably not. They probably thought some of the things were right.
I mean, but I studied where the Shammai group and Hillel group, there was infighting within, because Shammai didn't see that, for instance, proselytizing within Hillel. They didn't see that was right. So there was infighting within the Pharisees as well. So that's something to consider.
Mm-hmm.
But when faced with the Sadducees,
They don't have the.
they didn't have the infighting during that.
Yeah.
They banded together over the more.
The Sadducees, from my view, it seems like they're more of we're culturally, like how we have in the modern day, where we're culturally Jewish, but we're not. We don't believe in the faith in a sense. It's kind of how it seems like.
Sort of. They did believe in like the law of Moses, sort of, but that's like all they believed in. They didn't believe in the prophets and the later, writings of scripture that came after that.
Uh-huh.
And so they just went on like a sort of like a plain reading of the law of Moses. And so they didn't see any angels in the Torah and law of Moses. They didn't see any like spirits and stuff. And the Pharisees are accepting the later revelation from God as it was revealed throughout the rest of the scriptures, but they didn't accept that, and so it was kind of like, we don't. But they were still Jews, but they were very restrictive in what they believed.
Yeah.
So Jesus actually was more in line with the Pharisees than any other Jewish group, because he believed in the resurrection, he believed in angels, he believed in the world to come, afterlife, and the the Pharisees invited Jesus to eat with them with their strict like purity laws that they upheld, and Jesus, was eating with them, and there were some disagreements here and there, but the fact that they invited him to come eat with them is really telling that he was very similar to their practice and beliefs.
Oh. Nice. But at the end,
So they're not all bad.
yeah, they're not all bad. But I just want to wrap up. In the end, as we were talking about, only the Roman, the non-Jewish person is looking for the actual truth. It seems like, he's the only one that has like the care for Paul's being at the end. Like when we look at verse 10, let me find it again. We look at verse 10. Now when arose a great dissension, the commander, fearing lest Paul might be pulled to pieces by them, commanded the soldiers so. In the end, it's just looking more so in a funny way that the commander's kind of like, oh, well, I actually care for the truth in this situation. I don't want to get in your philosophical disagreements. Let's just pull him back. And so when we look at 11,
Or he just cared that Paul was not going to be torn apart.
yeah, it's kind of both. Like, yeah, I think he started this trial looking for the truth.
Are they in his care? I mean, isn't he in their care kind of?
Yes, but
Especially,
he didn't, until he found out that he was a Roman citizen, and even so, like if you think about it in all honesty, probably finding out if he was a Roman citizen, he probably was still like, he could have still had the option to be like, oh, well, you're Jewish, go that way. He had that option. I think we forget human tendencies, like, well, especially back then, there's no cameras, how's anyone going to know? So he probably had, but he's trying to figure out what's going on. Actually, is like, look, I can't have you just kill Paul right here. We gotta, we started the same. We gotta see it to the end.
Yeah.
So then this gets to the encouraging vision, which is, verse 11. It's a lie in of itself, But one night immediately following, the Lord stood at his side and said, "Take courage, as you have solemnly witnessed to my cause at Jerusalem, so you'll witness at Rome." So what's the most obvious reason why that's encouraging?
it sounds scary because Rome is like this big superpower that.
He's not going to die the next day.
Yeah, he's not going to die the next day. That's the most encouraging. He's like, look, don't worry, you got to go to Rome.
Yes.
And like as Ben saying, I bet you Paul's like internally thinking like, I got to go to Rome?
So he's not in Rome, he's living in
He's in Jerusalem still, so.
But
He get-
he's been told by the Holy Spirit that he's going to be bound.
Uh-huh.
So he's experiencing that. And if you're bound, you could, he could die any moment. If he hears this message that you're not going to die until you get to, that you're going to make it to Rome, he knows I'm not going to die until I get to Rome.
Yeah.
He also realizes that it's taxing on Paul. In other words, he's saying, look, you got more work to do.
Mm.
You've got to proceed on. And like you guys have said, Rome is the place in the world at that time. And he said, you're going to present me before, Rome, the government of the so-called world at the moment. So you still got work to do. Buck up. Let's go.
Yeah. Warren, where's, I cannot say this, Wiersbe, he once wrote, Jesus often spoke these words during his earthly ministry to take courage and things like that, to not discourage. He spoke them to the palace man, palisade, I cannot say that word, in Matthew 9:2, and to the woman who suffered with the hemorrhage in Matthew 9:22. He shot them to the disciples in the storm in Matthew 14:27, and repeated them to the upper room in John 16:33. As God's people, we can always take courage in times of difficulty because the Lord is with us and will see us through. So that's very encouraging. And then it goes on and talks about, theoretically, Paul had been defending himself in Jerusalem, but in practicality, he had been witnessing to the Lord's cause. And the apostle was disappointed because he thought he had failed to convince his fellow Jews. So Jesus gave this message to him at Jerusalem. So think about that. This whole time, if I'm Paul, I'm trying to win over in this Sanhedrin. I'm trying to get put into a cage again. I think over a period of time, just the human psyche is just going to get broken. You know, even if you have the Holy Spirit, in a sense, I don't think you can escape death. Yeah. So he feels like maybe he messed up. So when it goes on and it says, so Jesus gave him a message of commendation. You have solemnly witnessed to my cause at Jerusalem. Paul's task was not to convert, but to preach. And I think that's very important to us. I think a lot of times when we're trying to go talk to people, we're in the mindset of converting. And I think when we're in the mindset of converting, instead of preaching, which is a form of teaching, we find ourselves in this discussion with somebody, and it appears to ourselves that we lose. Because our goal is not to get the message, it's to make someone come in. And those are two different outcomes. If I preach the word, that person can walk away, and then eventually that seed's been planted, and maybe they can come back. If I'm just trying to convert, did he really hear the word, or did he hear just me trying to convince him?
Depends on what you're trying to say about converting.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're preaching the word and intending to do that, I don't think you can separate the two. But that comes as a result.
Mm-hmm.
But our purpose is we want as many people to get to heaven as possible.
Yeah.
But whether they're converted or not, that's their choice and in God's hands as far as providing the increase.
Mm-hmm.
But we can attempt to convert, but we're not converting them to our opinion or our side. I think just careful with saying that, because what are you doing to convert? You're preaching. So we're saying the same thing. I think that's important.
I think the way I may have misspoke, I'm trying to say, don't go in solely thinking of converting. You know, you're trying to get the message out. That's, like you were saying, that's a product of the preaching. So that's going to come up in the preaching. But if you're not trying to get the message out first, if you're looking at it like in a hierarchy, like convert, preach, this stuff, it's not going to work. There's an order to it. You preach, and in the process you convert. But
it's just like the Great Commission. I mean, they talked about today. Well, if you were first, it's blowing up. I mean, it says you got to preach the word first.
Yeah.
It says go. So
And it says if they believe.
yeah. So it's kind of like you plant the seed, and then hopefully it turns into a tree.
And like Richard said, they have to make the choice. In today's world, it's with a lot of popular trends in Christianity, it's not preaching the word, it's the conversion first and then the preach. And that doesn't...
It's like, what are you converting to?
Yeah. Are you converting to hang out with me? Are you converting to be a part of the group? And then you get into the preaching?
Yeah, I've seen that. I saw that at camp, actually. You know, we just got to dunk them, and then the rest is later, you know. It's like, wait a minute. You know, it's not, if they're just getting dunked, you're getting wet. You know, what's the purpose?
But when we see going further in Acts, we're gonna stop here, but we see going further in Acts, Paul's preaching, even when he's in Rome, when he's like basically like kind of like a prisoner, but I guess you would say like a privileged prisoner for a bit. He's got somewhat nice accommodations. He's preaching the word of Christ. He's not saying you need to become. He's saying this is the word, this is what we do. And in the process, the people are converting because they've heard the word. I think
proclaiming the message versus like making disciples.
That's the thing. Yes, that's a
disciple is like
beautiful way.
Who is converted. Basically, they're learning. They're wanting to imitate the teacher, which would be Jesus in this situation. But instead of like making disciples, he's just like telling them.
Yeah. Yep. I'm going to end it here, but before I want to end it with a closing prayer, and I forgot to get the announcements out. So today, after the 5 p.m. Service, we're going to do the Cracker Barrel thing, so hopefully I'll see a lot of y'all there. We're gonna reserve, or I'll call in, probably reserve like 10 seats just to be safe. If we need more, we'll add more on. But that's today after the 5 p.m. Also, if you want to go to the Georgia Bible Museum, let us know by October 3rd. So we need to know so we can kind of get a heads up, get it planned and whatnot. We're planning on going on December 18th. And that's like the last Saturday. After that, it's shut down for like literally the 24th through the 2nd. We're just done. So if you need to, yeah, I think it is. Yeah, look, I think it's in LaGrange, Georgia. Yep. So, and then also if you have fun ideas for anything like, Barron's game, Legion game, breakout room, things like that, let us know. And then the next meeting, we'll talk about it and we'll try to get something scheduled, some time for that. But with that, Ben, could you lead us in a closing prayer?
Father in heaven, we thank you for this time that we have had this morning to study your word and to learn more. And thank you for the teachers that present that to us. And thank you for the opportunity to come together and fellowship. And please watch over us as we go throughout the rest of our day. And to those who are going to worship later, please be with us there. And those who are going home, please